Hello everybody, welcome back. We're going to do the quadratic equation formula today. Alright, I've already got this up here. Oops, I don't know what that. Okay, so we're going to do, did I say it right? We've got the quadratic formula. Now you do this when you've gone through the factoring process and a does not equal to 0. So when you can't look at it and immediately go, this is my answer, these are the numbers that I want to use, or completing the square gives you a really long, complicated answer too, this is what you want to go to. It looks really hard, but it's not. It's just plug and chug. You get your numbers and you plug it in the equation, and then you go through regular math steps. Okay, so the equation is x is equal to, I have lots of colors, and I'm going to color coordinate so you can see where everything goes in. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared. Oh, there's one. Minus, I'll make this longer, 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And again, my answer looks really complicated because I wanted to color coordinate it so you can kind of see where everything plugs in, but normally it wouldn't take that long to write down. Okay, so going back to my original equation, what I've given to find in the first place, I've got a is used twice, my b is used twice, and my c is used once, and the equation is negative b plus or minus the square root of the whole quantity, so this entire thing is in here, alright, and it's b squared minus 4 times a times c. Now, when you're doing stuff like this, you have to remember the process of math, so you want to do parentheses, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction, in that order. Okay. And then within the parentheses, you'll go back to the top. If there's more parentheses in there, you'll go inside those parentheses, or you'll do the multiplication, or you'll do the exponents and then the subtraction and addition. Okay, so just remember that process when you're going through this equation. Because this is the only hard part, is remember the equation. That's the only hard part. Everything else is literally plug it in a certain spot. This equation does not change. You will always set it up this way, and it will always match this equation here. So, let's do an example. Yep, that looks like a good example. It looks good. So I'm going to do 4x squared plus x minus 3 equals 0. So I have 4x squared plus x, I'm going to have a 1 there, minus 3. And I'm just going to use red. Equals 0. Okay, so this is my equation, which means this is my c right here, and this is my b. Alright, so basic setup. Look how I lined it straight up with the regular equation. So now I'm going to plug in. I've got x is equal to negative b, which is 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so it's 1 squared. Remember, 1 squared is 1 times 1, so it's 1, minus 4 times a, which is another 4, times c, which is a negative 3. That negative carries in here. Okay, even though it's not a multiplication problem, that negative carries in here because I can write this the same as plus a negative 3, and it would mean the same thing. So this whole quantity comes in here, and the entire thing is over 2 times a, which is 4 again. Alright, so just notice I set up the original equation, and I literally just plugged in my numbers. That's all I did. So now I'm going to look back at the math. I'm going to start in here first with the multiplication, because here's my little quantity set in here. So I've got 4 times 4 is 16, and double checking my math, 16 times a negative 3 is a negative 48. So I'm going to have x is equal to, actually I'm going to do this in green. So I'm going to have x is equal to -1 plus or minus the square root, and I'd already said 1 squared is 1, so there's my first step, minus a negative 48 all over 2 times 4. Now you could go ahead and do all these little steps individually. So like these two right here, I just combined at the same time. I didn't write them out separately. But I went ahead and left 2 times 4 so that we remember that's the next step that we're going to do after we do the square root. So I'm going to erase this part here because I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to say, alright, next I've got x is equal to -1 plus or minus the square root all over 2 times 4. So now I'm going to do my math inside my square root. 1 minus a negative 48, so 1 minus a negative 48 is the same as 1 plus 48. So that gives me 49. That's a little long. Alright, notice how every time I kept everything under the square root sign, and I extended it if I needed to, just to remind myself that everything that I've been doing is still in the square root sign, so I don't accidentally leave anything out and don't multiply it the right way. Alright, so now I can erase this bottom part. Okay, so now I'm going to do my multiplication here. So I'm going to have x is equal to -1 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 8. Now next I can look at this right here. Well, I like to do factor trees. I don't know about you. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say 49. And I'm going to think to myself, what goes into 49? Well, this particular number has an even, oops, that's not it, has an even multiplication, and it's 7 times 7. So I can take out a 7. I like to tell my kids, to get out of jail, you got to have a partner. But the partner doesn't get out too. He gets caught. Poor partner. Okay. So now I'm going to take out my 7. I'm going to have x is equal to -1 plus or minus 7 divided by 8. Now this plus or minus here means I'm going to break this down into 2 separate equations. So I'm going to have x is equal to -1 plus 7 divided by 8, and x is equal to -1 minus 7 divided by 8. So I'm going to come back here and erase this. So I'm literally just going to do the math for both of these. And I'm going to give them numbers. I'm going to say this is x1 and this is x2. So I'm going to start with x1. So x1 is equal to -1 plus 7 divided by 8. So the entire thing is divided by 8. Well, -1 plus 7 is 6 divided by 8. And I can break this down to 3/4. So that's my first answer. So over here on the side, I can write x number 1, and again, this is x number 1. This isn't like x to the first power or x to the squared or anything else. I'm making sure that everybody knows that this is my first value for x. So x1 is equal to 3/4. So next up, I'm going to do x2. x2 is equal to -1 minus 7 divided by 8. -1 minus 7 is equal to -8 divided by 8, which is equal to -1, because 8 divided by 8 is 1, and that negative sign carries over. So then x2 is equal to -1. Now, and depending on who your teacher is, some people like to have you write it individually like this. Some people say x1, comma 2 is equal to 3/4, comma -1. Some people like x is equal to the quantity 3/4, comma, -1. It depends on your teacher. Just ask them. Some people just might want you to leave it like this and to circle it. That's how I would probably do it. So that is your basic setup with an example for quadratic equations and the quadratic formula. If you have more questions, you can always leave comments on here and I'll always check them, or you can ask me in class. Okay? Thank you. Bye.